5 years ago, somebody said something to me that changed the direction of my life. She looked at me because we were on a Zoom call. It was 2021. Everyone was still meeting by Zoom. And here's what she said. I like listening to you. You should start a podcast. That was it. Not some huge prophetic word, not a 5-year business plan, not a perfectly mapped out ministry strategy. Just, I like listening to you. And apparently that was enough for me to think, okay, maybe I should start a podcast. And here's the funny part. I didn't really listen to podcasts, like hardly ever. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But we had a mutual friend who happened to be beta testing a course teaching people on how to start a podcast. So I signed up. For 6 weeks, she taught me everything that I needed to know. How to record, how to edit, how to upload, how to launch a podcast into the world. And 6 weeks later, Masquerade of Motherhood was born. Today, 5 years later, 225 episodes later, I can honestly tell you that this is something I never could have understood back then. The hardest part of podcasting was really never learning how to use the microphone and how to do all the things. It was continuing to say yes. Hey guys, welcome to The Mom Show. I'm your host, Courtney Doyle, and this is a place I am giving you permission to not have it all together. Hey friend, welcome back to The Mom Show. Today's episode is a little different because the podcast is turning 5 years old this week. 5 years. I honestly cannot even believe I'm saying those words, because if you think back over what has happened over the last 5 years of your life, I know for me, so much has happened. And to look at it as a podcast that I have been doing for 5 years, a job that I have been at for 5 years, a relationship that you've been in for 5 years, it's just like, how did we get here? And so as I was thinking how I wanted to celebrate this milestone, instead of doing a best of episode or counting down, the most popular interviews, I wanted to do something just a little bit more personal. Because when I do look back over the 225 episodes, I don't just see titles. I see seasons. I see women. I see conversations that changed me, prayers that were answered, prayers that are still being prayed, moments when I could not wait to hit record, and moments where I wasn't sure I could hit record. Today, I simply just want to tell you the story behind the show, because maybe somewhere in my story, you're going to recognize that God is doing something in your story. When the podcast first launched, it wasn't called The Mom Show. It was called Masquerade of Motherhood. The whole idea came from something I had observed in motherhood, and honestly, something I knew very well myself. We're really good at wearing masks. The mask of, I'm fine, I've got this, my marriage is great, my kids, they're wonderful. We are so good. Meanwhile, underneath the mask, there is fear, perfection, comparison, control, mom guilt, performance, people pleasing, all the things that we really don't want anyone else to see. So that's where we started. Unmasking perfectionism, unmasking expectations, anger, comparison, busyness, control. I loved asking those questions until God asked me one, almost as if he quietly whispered, okay, Courtney, what about you? Because apparently I thought everyone else should take off their masks while I just kept mine on. Isn't that just like all of us? No, you go do that, not me. And that's when Unmasking Me was born. And honestly, that was terrifying. Here's the deal. I've received quite a few questions over the course of this year. And here's what most of them have been. What about your story, Courtney? Where did unmasking and the masquerade of motherhood, where did that come from? Well, that's a hard one, because it's easier to ask the questions than it is to answer them. I have prayed about this. I've asked others for their insight. And with all clarity, God spoke to me and said, unmask you. My hope all along for this podcast is for moms to find their identity in Christ, not in the successes and failures of our parenting, for moms to feel welcome and supported, to meet each other in the messy middle and encourage each other through prayer and community. So here's my story. can still hear that version of me. She was so scared. She had no idea where that decision would lead. And I thought, because I was asking everyone else to be vulnerable, I didn't have to be. And God was like, no, I'm teaching you to be vulnerable as well. And it was very hard. Looking back now, I don't think that this podcast was ever just about me helping other moms take off their masks. I think God was using it to slowly remove mine. And it was very scary. I worried, what if people know? What if they don't want to follow me anymore? What if they don't want to listen to the podcast? What if they are so disgusted by the things that I'm sharing about me personally? I really believed, and if I had not been going into that so prayerfully, and if I had not been doing all of those interviews with other women who were showing me what it looked like to unmask, I do believe that the enemy would have lied to me and continued to tell me that I couldn't do it as well. So those interviews were the standard for what let me say, you know what, God, you're right. If I'm expecting that vulnerability from other women, I owe them the respect to share my story as well. As the podcast grew, the conversations grew too, and I introduced Mom 101, practical encouragement, things I've learned as a wife and as a mom and as a woman who follows Jesus. But eventually something happened. I started hearing from moms who were not just looking for encouragement, they were looking for someone to help them navigate really difficult situations. So the podcast evolved into the series, Help My Child, and I let the moms fill in the blank. We talked about my child is struggling with anxiety, mental illness, eating disorders, disabilities, technology, identity, faith. Some of those episodes became some of the most listened episodes we have ever released. One simple episode, Help My Child Is, has now been listened to thousands and thousands of times. What that taught me is moms don't need perfect answers. They need honest conversations. But something else happened while I was interviewing all of those incredible women. The more I listened to moms talk about what their children were going through, the more I realized moms needed help too. So the show changed again from Help My Child Is to Help I'm a Mom Who. Because motherhood isn't just about raising children, it's about caring for the woman God entrusted with those children. Before that transition happened, we did a series at Christmas titled Help, It's the Holidays. One of my guests, Amy Grote, had experienced the unimaginable loss of her daughter on Christmas Eve. We had planned to have that conversation about grief, but what Amy didn't know, and of course I didn't know, was that just days before our interview would be scheduled, my own dad unexpectedly passed away. You see, now I wasn't interviewing about grief from the outside. I was sitting in the middle of it. And there's a moment in that conversation where our stories collide, where something Amy says lands in a place that only God could have orchestrated.
I think having an eternal perspective has just helped us so much. But this verse in Revelation 21:4.
Stop. What in the world? Okay.
Do you have chills? I have chills. I don't even know what you're going to say.
Because that's the verse I chose for my dad's card.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Well,
I've got
thank you,
goose.
Jesus. That is it, Courtney. That is it.
Okay. I'm not going to lose it. I'm not going to lose it. Read the verse.
Okay. Man, God is good. Thank you, Lord. But that's it. That's it. Revelation 21:4. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. For the old order of things has passed away. And I feel like this verse offers hope for a future without sorrow in heaven. And that's the only place we'll experience it. That is amazing, though. God is so good. He's just so good. There's no coincidences.
I'm blown away. Like my breath is taken away because that's God saying, I see both of you.
Yes.
I am in this with both of you, and there will be no more weeping, and there will be no more mourning. and death will be no more because of what Jesus has done on the cross.
That episode went on to become one of the most listened to episodes in the history of the podcast. But honestly, that's never been why it mattered to me. What mattered was realizing that God had scheduled that conversation long before I knew I would need it. Sometimes I think ministry looks like having the answers, but what I've learned is sometimes ministry simply just looks like showing up while you don't have the answers. Not long after that, we all know that 67 days later, after my dad had passed, I lost my mom, and those were some of the hardest months of my life. And I paused, not because I wanted to quit, because I needed to grieve. I needed to just be a daughter. I needed to breathe. But here's what happened that absolutely still amazes me. You see, up to that point, I had never missed an episode. I sort of prided myself on the fact that I had never missed an episode. But I had to pause. And when I did, I believed maybe this was the end. Maybe this was God saying, we're done here. Let's move on. I thought for sure the podcast would disappear and people wouldn't even know about it. The ratings would drop. The listens would deteriorate. I wasn't sure, but I just knew I had to stop, and I did. And here's what's crazy. When I logged back in months later, the podcast had grown. While I wasn't recording, people were listening. They kept finding old episodes. They kept sharing them. You see, God kept moving, and I had no idea. So I started the podcast back up, got back behind this microphone, and continued with my interviews. Then, not that many months later, I discovered someone had maliciously duplicated my RSS feed. I'll be honest. It was personal, and it hurt, and it was frustrating and discouraging. And again, I was like, Lord, really? After everything that's been going on, I finally got back behind this microphone, and now this? But once again, during another unexpected pause, God kept growing the ministry. And you know what? Those seasons taught me something I will never forget. This podcast has never depended on me at all. It belongs to Him. And it has taught me that I can really let go of holding so tight to this podcast, and I can release it to Him. I learned that my job is to be faithful. His job is to bring the fruit and to do all of the rest. The show has changed because I have changed. About a year ago, Masquerade of Motherhood became The Mom Show. The name changed, the mission didn't. We're still helping moms take off the mask, but only now the conversations have become, I believe, even more personal. You've probably noticed something new over the past few months. I sit down with a guest, we have a conversation, then a week later I come back with a solo episode because most times, God is not letting me move on. Sometimes something a guest says, it follows me to the grocery store, to my prayer closet, to my quiet time, to, while I'm doing laundry. And I know that we need to keep talking about it.
My father-in-law said to me, what if you quit mid-miracle? How would you feel if you just quit mid-miracle? I was up for whatever, but I realized God was telling me, your business, Lindsay, is to keep believing and not quit mid-miracle. Whatever that miracle is going to be, the I quit, I give up mentality had to be defeated. And it was. Yeah. And it was a choice I made, and I'm very glad I made it.
Yes, absolutely. And that's incredible advice, because how many of us do quit mid-miracle because it feels so easy to quit, especially with such adversity. We need to keep talking about peace and surrender and control and grace, serving from love, not for love, finding God in ordinary motherhood. This has become one of my favorite rhythms. 5 years ago, I thought my job was just simply to interview interesting, faithful women. And today, I think my job is to notice, where is God speaking, and invite you into that conversation. When I look back over these 5 years, there are a few things that I know now that I couldn't have known then. I know now that God rarely gives us the whole picture. He usually just gives us the next step. If He had shown me everything that was coming, the incredible guests, the friendships, the loss, the pauses, the obstacles, the joy, the tears, I'm honestly not sure I would have been brave enough to hit record. I'm thankful that He only asked me for one yes. I've learned that God never wastes a season. Not one. Not the exciting seasons, not the painful seasons, not the seasons where I felt confident, and not the seasons where I questioned everything. I also learned that asking isn't that terrifying. I have had to stretch myself and ask women that I thought they will never come on this show. It's too small. I'm not a good enough interviewer. And they have said yes. Even in the pauses, He has still been working. I have learned that some of the conversations that I thought were for someone else were actually, they were just for me. And that is so sweet to see that maybe He was just thinking of me in that interview, in that conversation. I know that there's been many times that you have messaged me and you have said, that episode changed me. And then I know you're the one that needed to hear it. There have been guests who have said things that have carried with me for months, even years. There have been conversations that have changed the way I pray. They changed the way I parent. They changed the way I've trusted God. Sometimes I think I have needed episodes more than anyone listening, and maybe that is the biggest thing that I've learned, that ministry isn't built all at once. It's built one ordinary Tuesday at a time. One conversation, one story, one prayer, one act of obedience, until one day you look back and you realize that you were simply just trying to be faithful. And God was building something far bigger than you ever imagined. I've thought about this a lot this week. The woman sitting behind that microphone 5 years ago was, well, she was excited. She was terrified. She was completely underqualified. She had no idea what she was doing or what was ahead. She didn't know about the women she'd meet, the stories she'd hear, the tears she'd cry, the guests who would become dear, dear friends. She didn't know she'd lose both of her parents. She didn't know she'd wonder if she could keep going. She didn't know of the obstacles that would come, but God did. And if I could sit beside her today, I would simply smile and say, keep pressing record. Not because every episode is going to be perfect, not because every Tuesday is going to be easy, because every yes matters. And maybe that's what I wanted to tell you about this story. Because maybe you're standing at the beginning of something that God is asking you to do. Maybe it's ministry, a business, a dream, a conversation, an apology, a boundary, a book you need to write, a prayer that you're afraid to pray, a confession you're afraid to make. And maybe you're waiting until you know exactly how it's all going to work out. Friend, I couldn't see 5 years ahead. I could barely see 6 weeks. But I took the next step anyway. And I've discovered that God is really good at meeting us in our obedience. You don't need a 5-year plan. You just need enough courage to say yes today. Before we end, I simply want to say thank you to every guest who has trusted me with her story. Thank you. To every woman who has ever pressed play. Thank you. To every person who has shared an episode, left a review, sent an email, or told a friend, thank you. This little podcast started because one woman looked at me and said, I like listening to you. I had no idea what God would do with one ordinary conversation. 5 years later, I'm still here. I'm still learning. I'm still asking questions, still taking off the mask, still believing that honest conversations absolutely point us back to Jesus. And I'm incredibly grateful that you've been on this journey with me. So, happy 5th birthday to The Mom Show. Here's to whatever God has planned for year 6. Thanks for being here. Until next time. Thanks so much for listening to The Mom Show with Courtney Doyle. Remember to check the show notes for any links, books, or resources that are mentioned in each episode. We want to be sure this blesses other mothers. And in order to do this, if you're listening via podcast, be sure that you like and share. If you could write a review, that would be fantastic. It helps us get in front of other moms. If you're watching via YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. This way, you won't ever miss an episode. We want to make sure that we increase our reach to other mothers who need a little encouragement, a community, and a whole lot of Jesus. We're so glad you're here.